Welcome back to Leader Time by FedNet, your podcast source for daily floor remarks by Senate Majority Leader John Thune and Democratic Leader Chuck Schumer throughout the 119th Congress. On January 29th, Thune discussed the Illegitimate Court Counteraction Act, which had failed to advance the day before, and the pending nomination of Lee Zeldin to be EPA Administrator ahead of a first procedural vote. The following material is protected by copyright.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, Senate and quorum call.
We're not in a quorum call.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, yesterday afternoon, my Democrat colleagues, and when I say my Democrat colleagues, I mean all of my Democrat colleagues, with one exception, chose to block legislation to sanction individuals at the International Criminal Court who participate in investigations or prosecutions of American or Israeli citizens. In the wake of the vote, a number of my Democrat colleagues put out a statement expressing their concern at the ICC's decision to issue arrest warrants for Israeli leaders. I suppose it's nice that they're concerned, Mr. President. They should be concerned. But it would be even nicer if they had done something about it. It's hard for me to fathom how Democrats could vote against this common sense measure. In fact, they wouldn't even vote to have a debate. I'm not sure if they're afraid of antagonizing the anti-Israel wing of their party or if they're simply too beholden to big tech, which lodged some tenuous concerns about this legislation. But whatever their reason, Democrats chose to vote no. No to standing up for our ally Israel. And even worse, no to standing up for our own citizens. Apparently, the America Last playbook is alive and well in the Democrat Party. Mr. President, Republicans tried to the very end to accommodate Democrats in hopes of finally getting this legislation over the finish line, nearly 8 months after the Republican-controlled House first passed the bill. But Democrats kept moving the goalposts, and Republicans were not going to just gut the legislation to get Democrat votes. If Democrats decide that they want to take real action to address the targeting of our allies and prevent future targeting of American citizens, Republicans are here. Till then, we'll continue to do what we can without Democrats to defend our allies and our nation. Mr. President, over the last 4 years, the Biden administration set our energy security on a dangerous path. Administration policies created serious uncertainty for energy producers. The administration sharply restricted oil and gas development. New government regulations threatened to close existing power plants even as our electric grid struggled to keep up with demand. The president attempted to force the widespread adoption of electric cars again, despite the incredible strain that would place on our already shaky power grid. And the list goes on. Mr. President, a recent report from the North American Electric Reliability Corporation warns of, and I quote, mounting resource adequacy challenges, end quote, in the next decade. One reason is the retirement of conventional energy generators in some areas because, or I should say in some cases, because of regulation. Another is increased demand, like increasing demand for electricity being driven by artificial intelligence data centers. It takes roughly 10 times as much electricity to run a ChatGPT query as it takes to run a Google search. Think about that. Imagine the energy demands of AI at scale. Anyone who thinks we can be on the leading edge of new technology with less or less reliable energy should think again. We need more energy. And the good news is we have it. In fact, we have the resources to be energy dominant. But we need to start saying yes to American energy. Mr. President, on his first day in office, President Trump took the first steps toward restoring American energy dominance. He declared a national energy emergency, which will allow him to cut through some of the red tape that stifles energy production as we continue to work toward broader regulatory relief. He also reversed the Biden administration's pause on new exports of liquefied natural gas, a decision that threatened American jobs and left our allies looking elsewhere for their energy. President Trump also reopened parts of Alaska to energy development that the Biden administration had previously closed off. He spared the American people from the Biden electric vehicle mandate, and he put the brakes on spending from the Democrats' so-called Inflation Reduction Act, in reality a climate bill whose actual cost has skyrocketed since it passed. Mr. President, energy is an asset. And producing our own energy means we don't have to rely on other nations for a critical resource, including countries that don't share our values. Energy dominance is a deterrent to our adversaries, and it's literally the engine of our economy. But if we want to restore our energy dominance, we have to start saying yes to American energy. Yes to an all-of-the-above energy strategy that includes everything from oil and gas to hydropower and biofuels. Everything. We need all of it. Mr. President, I've come to the floor many times to discuss the negative effects of burdensome regulations. And for the last 4 years, the EPA has put forward some of the Biden administration's most harmful regulations. There was the WOTUS rule that would have been a disaster for farmers and ranchers. The Good Neighbor rule that would have shuttered power plants in several of our states. The Clean Power Plan 2.0, which would have jeopardized our future energy security. Overly strict emission rules for vehicles that would have forced Americans into electric vehicles that they don't want, and in most cases can't afford. Costly standards for medium and heavy-duty trucks that would have harmed small trucking operations. The list, Mr. President, goes on. Regulations like these, drawn up in Washington, D.C., have real-world impacts. And I'm pleased that President Trump is committed to giving Americans relief from excessive regulations and that his EPA nominee will help him implement that vision. Lee Zeldin, whose nomination we will vote on later today, is a former 4-term congressman representing a district almost completely surrounded by water. He understands the stakes of environmental protection. His record in Congress speaks to this. But Mr. Zeldin also recognizes that the EPA can't be a hammer in search of nails, and that EPA rules have to be balanced with the needs of our economy, our national security, and the American people. He also understands the importance of collaboration with stakeholders, something that was too often lacking in the Biden administration. I know farmers and ranchers in my state would have appreciated a seat at the table before the Biden administration resurrected the harmful WOTUS rule. And I'm pleased that Mr. Zeldin is focused on bringing a collaborative approach to the EPA. Mr. President, I'm also grateful that Mr. Zeldin committed to timely release of the renewable volume obligations as is required by the Renewable Fuel Standard. In years past, the Biden EPA has been late in releasing its renewable volume obligations, which were often below industry production levels, creating instability for producers. Biofuels are an important asset in America's energy portfolio. So I'm pleased that Mr. Zeldin will ensure that biofuel producers have the certainty that has been lacking in recent years. And I'm encouraged that Mr. Zeldin is willing to work with Congress on President Trump's promise of year-round E-15 sales. Restoring energy dominance will require an all-of-the-above approach. It will require a smarter approach from regulators, and I look forward to working with Mr. Zeldin in carrying out this important work.
Schumer discussed a federal funding freeze, President Trump's cabinet nominees, and paid tribute to a retiring Capitol police officer.
So, Mr. President, 2 nights ago, the Trump administration committed a breathtaking act of economic sabotage. In the blink of an eye, OMB announced a near universal freeze on all federal grant funding. Donald Trump's actions can be summarized with 3 C's: chaotic, careless, cruel. It is a gross overreach by Republicans, and it is no surprise that the American people are furious. Last night, a federal judge issued an administrative stay of OMB's announcement, but the danger is not over, not by any means. Donald Trump and his ultra-right puppet, Russell Vought, will keep trying to make this freeze happen. Today, I will speak to Democratic governors around the country to discuss how this freeze is hurting their states and talking about coordinating our responses against this gross abuse of presidential power. The blast radius of OMB's announcement was seemingly limitless. States, cities, towns, schools, small businesses, local law enforcement, nutrition services, elderly care, and so much more were impacted. It's as if OMB designed their announcement to maximize chaos and confusion and suffering for the American people. Make no mistake, this decision from OMB is Project 2025 in action. Project 2025 by another name. Donald Trump's lawless behavior fits a pattern. First, he pardoned insurrectionists. Then he fired independent watchdogs and labor commissioners. And now he's freezing congressionally approved funding. Before our eyes, Donald Trump is rigging the system and breaking the law to help his billionaire friends at the expense of working families. I got calls yesterday from Republican town supervisors and mayors in a panic about flood prevention and sewer projects, who told me they had shovel-ready projects to go, but now those projects were in limbo. I got calls from food banks like Feedmore, Western New York, fearful that suddenly they won't be able to make deliveries to hungry people. I got calls from groups like Rochester Head Start, worried sick that they're not going to be able to pay rent or pay their staff. I got calls from Roswell Park Cancer Center in Buffalo and Northwell Hospital on Long Island, asking if funding was suddenly going to vanish. How is freezing all this funding going to help families pay for groceries or make neighborhoods safer or create new jobs? Of course it won't. In fact, it's going to do the opposite. 1 week ago, OMB nominee Russell Vought refused to answer in testimony questions about the impoundment of congressional funds. Now we know why. He did not want to alert Congress about this freeze on funding. Mr. Vought clearly withheld information that senators were entitled to know, and he needs to give us more answers. The Senate Budget Committee should not proceed with Mr. Vought's confirmation until we get answers. I join my fellow Democrats in calling for a 2-week delay of Mr. Vought's markup. Firings. Yesterday, President Trump showed his true hostile colors to working people and union members in America. Without cause, the president took the unprecedented step of firing a duly appointed commissioner of the National Labor Relations Board 2 years before her term was set to expire. Then last night, President Trump fired 2 Democratic members of the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, leaving that body frozen without a quorum. Let's be very clear. These unlawful firings are a direct assault on working people. The president's decision will increase workplace discrimination, worsen unfair hiring practices, and erode workers' ability to push for better wages and safer working conditions. What these firings will do is stack the deck against employees trying to organize or join a union to get better benefits and better pay. Donald Trump, he says he wants to help working families. This is no way to do it. And these firings are clearly unlawful. Unlawful. These purges are another example of Donald Trump's lawless presidency, like his pardon of insurrectionists, eliminating independent watchdogs, and illegally freezing congressional-approved funding. Everything Donald Trump is doing fits a pattern. He's abusing the office of the presidency. He is breaking the law to rig the system to help his billionaire friends, all at the expense of working families. Today, Robert Kennedy begins testifying before the Senate Finance Committee. To state the obvious, having a very wealthy anti-vaxxer running America's public health would put every single American in danger. Mr. Kennedy is a walking public health crisis waiting to happen. Of course, he's doing exactly what everyone thought he'd do in his hearing. He's suddenly saying what people want to hear about vaccines. He's claiming he was never against vaccines or that his words have been twisted. We need to look at Kennedy's record. He spent years making millions peddling conspiracy theories and outright lies. His nomination should go no further. On Mr. Patel. Tomorrow, the Senate Judiciary Committee will hear testimony from Kash Patel, President Trump's nominee to be the next FBI director. Mr. Patel is not remotely prepared to serve as FBI director. In fact, he has a long history of spreading lies about the FBI and of smearing the public servants who work there to keep us safe. He's a conspiracy theorist, a hard-right ideologue, and openly hostile to the free press. During tomorrow's hearing, the most important questions for senators is, how on earth will Mr. Patel's confirmation make Americans safer? How will Americans be safer if the FBI is led by a darling of the QAnon movement? How does it serve America's public safety to elevate a January 6 sympathizer to the highest level of enforcement in the land? How can Americans trust that Donald Trump will drain the swamp if he puts one of his most loyal political fixers as chief law enforcer? It's written you can't serve two masters, and that's sure true of Mr. Patel. He either serves the interests of the American people or serves the interests of Donald Trump. Given Patel's history, it's very clear who he will choose: Donald Trump. And on Tulsi Gabbard. Tomorrow, the Senate Intelligence Committee will hold a hearing for President Trump's nominee for DNI, Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. Of all the people President Trump could have nominated for the job of DNI, few could be worse for our national security than Tulsi Gabbard. If confirmed, Ms. Gabbard would be a walking liability to our intelligence community and our national security. She has a long and troubled history of spreading falsities and sympathizing with the likes of Vladimir Putin and Assad. Given her history, it's not unreasonable to ask if Ms. Gabbard would use the DNI job to push false intelligence for political ends. Is Ms. Gabbard really the best the Republicans have to offer for the job? Someone who's known to make things up out of thin air? Is this really who Republicans want managing our intelligence community, which is fact-based? Our intelligence agencies, the people who work there, rely on truthfulness and facts to keep our country safe. Ms. Gabbard is deficient in both qualities and clearly does not merit elevation to the position of DNI. And finally, Officer Mark Gazelle on his retirement. I want to honor a longtime officer with the U.S. Capitol Police who is retiring after this month after 34 years, Officer Mark Gazelle. For the last 34 years, Officer Gazelle has carried out his duty to protect and defend this great citadel of democracy with supreme excellence, courage, and professionalism. No matter his assignment, from the First Responder Specialty Unit to the Mountain Bike Unit to the Senate Chamber as a plainclothes officer, Officer Gazelle kept the Capitol complex safe. And he was instrumental as floor officer in making sure the body could carry out the work of the American people day in, day out. We all owe Officer Gazelle our deepest gratitude for his service to the Capitol Police, to the Congress and the nation. We say to him, thank you, and wish his family the very best. Is he here? Thank you, Mark.
Thanks for listening to this FedNet podcast, and be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. This program is copyrighted by Federal Network, Incorporated, and provided only for informational and educational purposes. Unauthorized reproduction, distribution, or use of this episode without expressed written permission from FedNet is prohibited.